Why, hello there. I hope you're doing well. It's getting back warm here in Portland. Just got to pour my coffee here. It's a nice decaf. It's the same one I had last time in my wormhole mug. So today we're going to talk about. I guess it's been the same thing for the past couple of these. We're going to talk about a serious subject. It's kind of related to what I talked about in the last one of these books and conversation. But I've been thinking about what I've been reading lately, and about even before I started this channel, about some of the books I'd been reading, and I think that it's become pretty hard for me to ignore this strain of commentary within popular books lately. That has been genocide, just kind of across all these different cultures, and these have been a wide variety of books written from a variety of different perspectives. If you read the Poppy War trilogy, the first book in that series, there was there were two kind of genocides in it, and the first one was roughly based off of the rape of Nanking, which at the end of the book they actually included a discussion about that, which I thought was really good. Which it was a very horrific scene in the book. It was there was a lot of dark things that she wrote about there, and that really happened. And if you read the book, The Rape of Nanking, you'll see parallels between the two of those. And then, of course, at the end of that book, she or somewhere in the series, maybe it was the end of that book, maybe it was in the third book, I don't remember. she commits her own genocide by essentially nuking the Japanese equivalent in that series, which kind of ties the whole thing back together. Man, that has such good fruit taste. And then, of course, American War completely parallels the 80s Palestinian kind of ongoing genocide there, and I would say Blood Over Brighthaven has clear references to Indigenous Americans genocide. Rejoice, a Knife Through the Heart. It starts with one of the characters named Casper, who is essentially funding or arming a genocide in Africa that gets stopped by the aliens showing up there. And then The Will of the Many, that has scenes of mass conquest. The whole world is essentially dominated by one culture at this point, which means that culture after culture after culture has already gone through a sort of cultural genocide, which still is a genocide, forcing people to adopt a new culture, or just eradicating the previous culture, which there was. Since The Will of the Many is kind of like a Roman-esque, you might consider like a Sicilian island, or maybe it's a Hawaiian island type thing, where the culture is radically different in the island compared to the mainland, and that culture is just completely decimated by the conquering of the mainland. And a series that I've loved for a long time, Malazan Book of the Fallen, that has multiple different types of genocide in it. One of them is the Wiccans who get subsumed into the Malazan Empire and then become a fighting force for it. And in one of the books, that they're almost completely decimated through the Chain of Dogs, which was an intentional effort to wipe out that armed force, the group of people they were trying to protect, and of course the Wiccans themselves. And then there was a number of on the I I can't remember the name of that empire. The in the later books, there's another empire that is clearly supposed to be the United States, and they are a very voracious empire, and they go and systematically, using the same sort of approach that Americans did, systematically encroach on indigenous lands and force conflict, and then get them introduced to capitalism and addicted to various drugs and things. And then, of course, the most extreme example is the Talon Moss, who essentially commit an entire ritual of suicide because they are so dedicated to the genocide of the Jihad or Jag. They're so committed to that they become an undead society, and that kills their previous society because they were an early. I kind of think that they're modeled after Neanderthals, and they kind of have that stockier, bulkier frame, and they essentially wipe out that culture because they're only a warrior culture after that. And I think the fact that our nonfiction about technology is actually becoming full of stories of genocide, like Careless People, which is about Facebook, has an entire section devoted to the real Myanmar genocide of the Rohingyas that happened. And it's kind of an amazing thing that a book that's generally about social media has to devote large sections of it to a genocide. And of course, there's two books that are specifically about it that I've read recently, The Message and One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This, in dealing with genocide. And I think we can add another series to this list, Nadede's Okorafor's books. She published a number of books recently. The first book was Who Fears Death, published in October of 2020, and the follow-up prequel novella, She Who Knows. And then there's a follow-up to that, which I haven't read yet, but I plan to read. These books are multi-generational, and they take place during the genocide of the Okeki people, which takes place in the real world kingdom of Sudan, and specifically the Darfur region. And what I learned after reading these is that Okorafor started writing this book originally in 2004, which is during the height of the Darfur genocide. So it's really clear that genocide inspired this book, and I think that's important context for this. And I think it's important that we also look at the broad fact that authors who are writing about very different parts of the world are still coming back to this theme, and a lot of this is fantasy, and so that makes it easier to approach these sorts of things. But it is this, again and again, this fact that genocide is happening in all these series, that it's not an accident, that there is something that's going on in our fiction that we need to be paying attention to. It's saying, look, this is a real problem that has been happening for generations. And yes, the Holocaust happened in 1945, and same with the Hiroshima and rape of Nanking. But we said never again for all these things, and they have continued to happen. And I think that what Okorafor's book does that's interesting compared to some of the other ones is it touches on a part of the world that is less well explored in Western books, like fantasy books. I would say even compared to some of the Asian influences, which are still really minor compared to the predominantly Western influences in fantasy and sci-fi, um, the conversations about genocide and the colonial effect on Africa happens even less. There was the Rwandan genocide that happened in the mid 90s isn't really talked about very much, and this genocide, which went on for a total of 8 years, just hasn't really been talked about. And I think that this book does a really good job of explaining the environment that this is happening, the types of people who are doing it, the influence, without really blaming any one specific group. But it's clear from the text that, especially since he specifically calls it out, that the Okeki are the Africans and the Nadi are Arabic. And you can see that in the way the characters are written, the way they're described. There's a clear racial distinction between the characters. And I think that we should really stand up and notice who the breadth of these authors. They are writing for personal experience, they're writing from historical experience. They clearly, in Poppy Wars, she recognized that there's probably someone in her family who may have been impacted by that before her family moved to the UK. And we really do need to think about what is wrong in our world, where Canadian authors, British authors, African authors, American authors are all including these sorts of things in their text. There has to be something that we must be cognizant of. And I think as being an American, we have to reflect on the fact that the U.S. is complicit in many of these genocidal acts. For every Bosnia that we engaged with or intervened, there's a Darfur or a Gaza that we didn't, that we decided to back the person doing the genocide. And I think that's important because that's what our country stands for. Whenever we look in the mirror, we have to recognize the fact that the United States enables these genocides. That is what our country values over other things. We could be spending that money on things like food or housing for people all over the world, USAID. Instead, we're sending bombs to Israel and bombing Iran. What I think is interesting is that Okorafor's story, Who Fears Death, does follow a woman who stops the genocide, whereas in Poppy War, the main character, she is a witness to genocide and then causes the genocide. And I think that this story is unique in that the way that she stops the genocide. And she does this in two ways. First, she becomes a powerful force for change because she's a sorceress. She just, in and of herself, just being a person in the public eye who can go and talk to people, she can affect change. And she does go into the heart of the country committing genocide and then does a very powerful act. I mean, it's not really realistic in the real world. I mean, she does kill every man of fighting age in a city and then somehow impregnates all the women of the same age. She does this through her own love and really based on the way the story happens, it's pretty obvious. I mean, she is pregnant with her own child at this point, and she knows that she is going to die. It's a really impactful in the world because it also eliminates an entire army that was about to go march on Okeki rebels, because Okeki are enslaved people. And they're rebelling, and where she who fears death. That's the main character's name is literally translated to who fears death. I know I would butcher it, so I'm not gonna try. But she comes from like this border area that of people who have escaped and are now free, but they're constantly at risk of being re-enslaved. The second way she stopped the genocide is rewriting religious texts. This is through a spell which she uses to free her people from the yoke of slavery, because the Nurus, that's not the Nadis, the Nurus, they become aware that the path that they're on is evil and they have to reform their way. And the text like is literally, it's like changing the Bible. It's like going in and getting rid of all the Leviticus sections to prevent LGBTQ hatred, or the portions about slavery that the American South used to argue for that slavery was okay. It's essentially doing those exact same things. And it's not like she didn't try individual change. She went and healed people. She healed people who were obsessed with doing genocide. It'd be like Mike Bolton, who wants to go and destroy Iran. It'd be like turning him and helping him see the errors of his way, and then he would go and become a radical force for change. But what actually happened was that those people who were healed and changed, they just ended up becoming victims of the genocide themselves. So she had to change her tact into something that was more systemic, that impacted the entire society and not just individuals, because genocide isn't an individual issue. It is a systemic cultural problem that needs to be addressed. And I think Blood Over Brighthaven did the exact same sort of thing. Basically, in that book, there was a decapitation of the government, and it stopped genocide that way. Malzahns genocides were a lot more complicated, but in some cases they were successfully completed, which was heart-wrenching as a reader, especially the one with Talk the Younger involved. That was devastatingly sad. And I think that a lot of our fiction is also pretty pessimistic about stopping the genocide. And I think Poppy Wars is especially so, because there's the retaliatory genocide that comes about from it, that continual escalation, that violence begets violence, and it's not easy to stop these cycles of violence. And I think despite the fact that a whole cities of military-aged men are killed in Who Fears Death, I think that there's a very positive perspective on genocide, that it can be stopped if we help people reevaluate the sources of their faith, and we have a serious intervention against our systemic our leaders, and address the root causes of why we're enabling and allowing a genocide. We can stop them. But generally, our art is reflecting reality right now. And, if you want to do something rather than just moping about it, you can donate to organizations like Amnesty International, which I do. I also donate to International Rescue Committee, which is on the ground, or was on the ground in Gaza. They've been pushed out. You can also donate to the UNRWA, which is specifically focused on Gaza. You can support Doctors Without Borders, Red Cross, Red Crescent, or you can directly support people who are being impacted. There's a lot of real people on Blue Sky who are requesting money that have been somewhat vetted by the community. You can definitely support them. I don't think anything will ever feel like enough. And that's okay. We can't look away from it. We need to do what we can. We need to continue to look at our art to chastise us, to continue try and teach our leaders that things need to change, that they're in the wrong. The fiction can help us understand what's happening in the real world, because it gives us a little bit of distance and safety from what's actually happening, but then it helps us understand the tools that we have to address what's really happening in the world. So I'm going to leave it there. I know this was a bit of a dark one, but I really love these books. They were incredibly fast, well, they weren't light reads, they were easy reads. Easy in terms of being fast reads. They were really emotionally devastating at certain points. They were interesting. I really loved the different culture that I got exposed to. And I'm reading The City of Brass as kind of an extension of other cultures. And I'm planning on doing one of these talking about a variety of the benefit of diverse reading. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one, and I really appreciate your time. Please comment, like, subscribe, and share it with other people. It really helps me out.